Hey, we have Samantha Lee Wright with us today, and we are going to cover a topic that gets a lot of coverage out there, especially with podcasters and those in the podcasting industry, because everyone gets hung up on what equipment to buy. I'm going to launch a podcast. The first thing they ask me when they're going through launches is, what do I need to buy? Do I need to have a whole big studio? It's funny how there's so many moving pieces with a podcast, but people get so hung up on that. Why do people get so hung up on equipment, Samantha?
Yeah, it's a good question. And first, Lyndsay, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the show that you put on. It's like you just dive in like you're doing now. You just dive into the good stuff. And I really appreciate that about you. People get caught up because it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to start a thing that requires these technical steps, right? It's not like you're going to take up running, or I don't know, if you were to take up anything new, like there's certain tools involved with starting anything new. And it's typically not tools that we're familiar with on a day-to-day basis. We're not taught in school, oh, here's the different type of microphones you have and whatnot. So it's understandable because it's something that's just unknown. And if we know anything about humans, we tend to fear the unknown.
That is true. And then you end up fixating on it, right?
Right. Or you start Googling and then you get 100 different answers.
My gosh.
Or you get led down, here, buy this $600 microphone. And now you need this, $1,000 worth of sound padding in your in your sound studio. And just, you start to feel like, oh, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I can't do this, or I can't afford to do this. But I try to tell people my personal story is starting my own podcast from scratch on a very, very tight budget. I bought a $40 microphone.
Sweet.
I borrowed $15 a month from a friend to cover podcast hosting. And I was thankful to already have a laptop and working internet. And that was it. I was ready to go.
Yeah. I love that. And the fact is, like you say, you can create your own podcast studio in your home without breaking the bank or like stressing yourself out. Now, what are some of the myths that's out there of like, oh, you need all of this stuff?
Yeah. So that is one myth. You need all this stuff. The other myth is that you need a perfect sound studio. You need all the soundproofing, you need the foam pads, and you need the $1,000 microphone to get a good sound quality, and that you need like an editor right off the bat, which is not true. Like if you have a simple podcast, if you're trying to get started, you can do all these things yourself and it doesn't take that much time to learn it. And I have people who take my course that are 14 years old. I have people who take my course who are 60 years old, and, they're doing this stuff on their own. But at the end of the day, it really all comes around to done is better than perfect. I would rather people get started, maybe do it wrong, but what's going to happen when you do something wrong? You're going to learn way faster than the person who waits and waits and waits because they're waiting to do it perfectly.
I love that. And really, like you said right there, like even if you get like some equipment and then you can improve as you grow, you don't need everything all at once. I love that.
Yeah.
So what do we need?
Yeah.
Like, what are the have to haves and what are the nice to haves?
Yeah, the have to haves, in my opinion, is a microphone. Although technically most computers or phones have built-in microphones, or maybe, you have those earbuds that plug in that have a microphone attached.
Yeah.
If push came to shove, that's really all you have. Then technically, sure, you can start a podcast with that. But I feel like nowadays listeners are getting more accustomed to good quality sound. And so you really want to try to have the best quality sound that you can. And nowadays you really can get close to professional sounding audio with a $60 microphone. It's not totally astronomical. at the end of the day, you do get what you pay for to an extent. Sure, if you had the $1,000 microphone, you might sound a little bit more like an NPR star. But I think that for most people like me still, I've never purchased a microphone that costs more than, I think the one I'm using now is $130. And it was, I think, $40 extra because I had to get the one that changed lights like this.
That
people
is
are watching
fancy.
on video. I was like, I don't
jealous.
need it to sparkle, but for $40, I'm going to have it sparkle, right?
I love that. That is awesome. And yeah, I think mine cost maybe $80. And before I used to have the snowball, that little white ball on the little legs.
Yeah.
And I think that was $40.
Yeah.
But I wanted something
we can get
that
into
was cool.
Yeah, something that's cool. So especially if you're doing video. So, but if your podcast is all audio, then, you really don't need that. So microphone is the must have. And I always recommend people get USB microphones, ones that plug directly into their computer, which would be the second must have. You really do need a computer. That being said, I do have a student who takes my course who he records directly into his phone. And, he just makes that work. And so if push came to shove again, if that's really all you have, then you can make that work. There's some hosting services even that provide that service where you can record right into your media host. And speaking of, that is kind of the other must have is a media host, which is essentially just a home for your website. So if you're familiar with the concept of purchasing website services somewhere like Squarespace or WordPress, then think of media hosting as similar to that. That's going to be the home for your podcast. It's where your files will get uploaded to that will then get pushed out into the world to places like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, places that people listen to podcasts. So those are the must-haves.
Yeah.
And other than that, the rest is kind of just nice to haves. And we can get into those, and we can also get into different tips for buying microphones if you'd like to.
Perfect. Yeah. My next question, actually, perfect segue, was because I know there's different types of microphones and all the techie stuff that are on the boxes or on the Amazon store. I'm just like, I don't even know what those things mean. Can you kind of help share what different types of mics there are?
Yeah. Well, the most important things to understand is one, a USB mic versus, and honestly, this is how untechy you can be when you do a podcast. I don't even really know what the other ones are called besides maybe aux microphones that might plug into like a converter or, a guitar amp or something like that. So you don't need any of that. You just need a USB microphone. Boom. That's all you need to know. And then the other thing to look for is there's two different kinds of microphones. There's condenser microphones and there's dynamic microphones. So, and that has to do with the little element that's inside your microphone, the way that little element picks up sound from its environment. So there's kind of two different concepts there. What's important to understand is condenser microphones are a little bit more luscious, let's say. So musicians really love them. If you record in like a professional sound studio, it's probably going to be a condenser microphone. But condenser microphones are very unforgiving when it comes to the sound quality of your room. So if you are recording from home, let's say, and you don't have a professional level sound padding all over the place, you have, echo a little bit coming from places, or you've got some background, maybe your kids are, downstairs playing in the background, that kind of noise is much less likely to get picked up on a dynamic microphone. So for most beginner podcasters, I recommend when you're shopping, stick in that category, stick with the dynamic microphones. And that's something you can plug into a search. But be careful, because I've, been searching for dynamic microphones, let's say on Amazon, and then a search results will come up and not all of those results are actually dynamic. You start reading the description and it's like condenser. And it's like, but I didn't search for condenser.
I know.
So
sponsored ads.
That can be frustrating.
They weed in there.
Yeah, exactly. So, when I was first getting started, I bought a $40 microphone. It was called the ATR 2100.
Yep.
And it worked beautifully. Yep. It became very popular. So the price went up. I think now it's about $99. I don't think that they've changed anything about it, but but that's where you're at. But now I've been hunting for other ones, and I have recently found a $65 dynamic microphone called the 𝗪𝗁 HD 300T. So if that's helpful.
How do you remember that?
If you've got a little bit of a higher budget, if you can spend more than, $200 to $300 on a microphone, then Shure mics, SHURE, are kind of the gold standard in the industry. So if you're looking for that little more quality sound. So I've got these listed out in like a little freebie that we can put out there for people. And I've got dynamic and condenser microphones on there. So if I want all the lusciousness of a condenser mic, that's fine. You just need to be a little more cautious about your studio itself and the way you design that.
That makes sense. And so obviously you're in an office, I'm in an office, which is probably the norm or a part of a room. How do we make it so that the sound in our room is a little bit better? I know before we went on air, you mentioned what that amazing picture is behind you and that it has two functions, which I thought, isn't that smart?
Yeah, when I was setting up my studio, so when I first started my podcast, we lived in a tiny 700 square foot home, and I recorded in the basement, which was thick, 2-foot thick stone all around it. It was like an old house built in the early 1900s. And it had great sound quality. I didn't really need to do much for it, which was right, because it was a small room, short ceilings, thick stone all around it. So it was real sweet. And then we moved to now our kind of dream home that we were able to afford because of the podcast, which is really great to say. And my office is a beautiful space, but it is probably the worst room to be podcasting in because it's got really tall vaulted ceilings. It's got huge glass windows all around it. And so I had to implement a lot. So the first thing I did was put a big thick rug on the wood floor. And then I put thick velvety curtains over all the windows. And I bought enough curtains so that I could open up the curtains and have that kind of scallop pattern going on in the curtain. So it's not just flat. The more divots of luscious material you can put in your podcast studio, the better your sound quality is going to be. So if you have, a bookcase, put it as close to your desk as is comfortable. If you have a comfy couch, throw it in your studio. Rugs, in a pinch, throw up towels or blankets or whatever you can do to dampen the hard surfaces that are in your recording space, and that will lower the amount of echo. So, and the most important place to do this is right behind where you're recording. You might think it's in front of you.
Yeah, you would.
But it's actually right behind you. So that's why I've installed this. I bought a cloth tapestry online and then just stretched over a little wood frame. And then I put behind it, I've got some thick kind of soundproofing material right behind that, like behind the canvas. So it's a nice little sound damper that's right behind me instead of that flat, hard surface wall.
That's a great tip. And I would never have thought to like what was behind me, only what's in front of me. And I do worry about some of my blank walls. So maybe I'll have to get more luscious fabrics.
Yeah.
I do love
the
fabrics.
more you can do, the better, but at the end of the day, I try to tell people, don't kill yourself over, trying to get a professional studio at home. If you have that dynamic microphone, then you get a lot more leeway. And two, if you know how to put the settings on your microphone correctly, then you've got a lot more leeway. So there's really only two settings that people need to be aware of when you plug your microphone into your computer. I'm a Mac girl, so it's a lot easier for me to kind of walk people through this on a Mac, but there is a way to do it on a PC too. But when you plug your microphone in and you're on a Mac, you click on the system preferences, and then you click on the sound icon. And then inside there, you can click on input. So it's asking you, okay, what input, what microphone do you want to use as your input? And then you'll see your microphones listed there. Click on your microphone. And there you can adjust the input volume of your microphone. So a lot of times you plug in your microphone to your computer and automatically the kind of automatic default state is going to be that input volume is set pretty high.
Gotcha.
And it's usually too high. And you can tell if it's too high because right there in that system setting, there's a visual of a little bar that goes across. Like maybe we can put a picture somewhere, but it's a little visual bar that when you make a sound, the little bar goes green and it tells you visually how high on the volume, scale you're going. And so if you're just talking regularly, you want your voice to never really go above the 50% mark.
Oh, okay.
And then if you get a little excited and you want to test that out a bit and get a little loud, you don't want that to go above about the 75% mark. So usually it's too high. And what happens if it's set too high? And here we can, I'll show people what this sounds like. I'm going to put my input volume up real high for a second. You can tell I'm very kind of mumbled and blown out, right? So I'm going to push that back down. Sounds a whole lot better.
That it does.
Yeah. And so that's, I'd say the number one mistake people make is they just don't even realize they can change that.
Right.
And then they don't know where to set it. And then the only other thing to really notice is a lot of microphones will have a setting on the mic itself, a little dial that they don't normally label it. It's just this dial that you're like, well, what is this? I don't know what this is. And so usually that's what's called the gain, GAIN. And without getting too technical, gain is essentially how loud your mic is picking up sound. It's kind of similar to input volume, but it's just a little different. And so with gain, what you want to do is you want to put it as low as you can without totally canceling out your voice or making you sound like a mouse. So you want to kind of experiment with putting the gain down as low as you can.
Okay.
And then adjusting the input volume and just see how that sounds. Do some test recordings and see how that sounds. But that's another mistake people made. So with my microphone, the gain button's like down at the bottom and it's so sensitive. It moves so easily. So I've taped it so that it doesn't move because, when that moves around, it really changes the sound of your voice and you want to keep that consistent. And then you want to walk if you're doing an interview based show, you want to walk your guests through this as well. And, help them tweak the microphone on their settings and also teach them to get close enough to their microphones.
That was my next question.
Thing. Yeah.
Are we supposed to be this close?
Oh my gosh. Yes. It sounds so good. Yeah. With dynamic microphones, you want to, what I call make out with the microphone. You want to get like 2 inches from the mic and it just makes you sound like so close and personal. With condenser microphones, I have a condenser mic. You want about 4 inches away. So, but it makes a big difference. You can tell if I come close to the mic, you're just like, oh my God, Samantha's talking right into my ear. She's like right there.
It's mesmerizing. It does sound better. And all those little tricks that you don't necessarily think about. This has been so helpful. Now, of course, I'm recording on Zoom, but some people record on extra platforms. Yes, it does cost more money. And so Zencastr is one that I can think about. Some people use Skype. Some people swear by, certain platforms. Obviously on a shoestring budget, I would assume you don't need that, but do you find that one thing is better than the other?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it is going to depend on your budget. If you're on a real tight shoestring budget, like when I started my podcast, I just used Skype because it was essentially free. All I had to do with Skype, you do have to buy a third-party app called Ecamm Recorder that you installed. It's a one-time purchase though. It's not a monthly thing.
That's not bad.
Doesn't it seem so rare to see anything now that's not a monthly purchase? It's like, I can buy this app and pay, $40 and have it forever. Wow. You don't see that anymore.
You feel like you've won the lottery.
So, yeah, exactly. So you do need that. But once you buy that, then it's free. The trick with Skype though, is that it's getting a little outdated. It just seems like not a lot of people really use it anymore. So people are like, what do you mean I have to start, I have to create a Skype account to interview you? Or to interview with you. So that there is a limitation there. Zoom, like what we're recording on now, it works fine. The biggest difference to understand between platforms like Zoom or Skype versus Zencastr or Riverside or any of those, special places that you can pay a little extra and record through is the difference between local recording or through the internet recording, I like to call it. So with Zoom, the way we're recording right now, my voice is coming through my microphone. It's going into my computer and through the Zoom app over the internet. And you're recording what comes out the other side. You're recording what's coming through the internet. So if my internet starts to go weak, or there's can be a bit of a like technical glitch to it, the sound quality is not quite as high than if I was recording or speaking into my microphone and the recording was getting recorded before it goes through the internet. And that's what those other platforms do. They record locally. So I'll be doing, like, I record on Zencastr for a lot of my interviews. And if I'm talking to someone and all of a sudden the internet kind of goes weak and I'm like, oh, I can't hear them very well, I don't worry about it because I know that the recording is not going to pick up on that. It's going to be the kind of original sound that's coming through them. So that's the biggest difference. And it just depends on kind of the caliber of podcast that you're going for. I think it's important to remember that at the end of the day, your content is what matters most. So, you know, you don't have to have the best of the best of the best of everything. It's great to get as best as you can within your limitations or your budget and your time constraints and whatever. But at the end of the day, people just want to listen to your show because it's got good content. Yeah. They're not going to listen if your audio quality is trash. You know, we know that, but you can get good quality through Zoom and whatnot, using these techniques. And one I taught you before we started recording.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. So one little hack, if you are recording through Zoom, is there's a setting. If you click on Zoom preferences under recording, there's a little box that you can check that says record a separate file for each participant. And what that does is it, instead of when you're done and you get the recording, instead of everything just combined together on one file, then it separates my voice from your voice. And what that does, it allows you to go in the editing room and edit those two separate files separately. So, you know, if I'm talking right now and Lyndsay, all of a sudden you start coughing, right? Then there would be no way to cut out your cough over my voice if it was all one track. But if it was two different tracks, then you could cut that out. I could keep talking and no one knows the difference. So it makes a big difference in the editing room. So your editor's going to love you now. Oh, this made my job so much easier.
Awesome. I know, again, those little tricks that I honestly just haven't had time to even investigate. I knew there were ways to, like, you know, make it improved, and that's why I'm doing this podcast. There's still things I need to learn and improve on. And that's why I'm having lovely guests like you to help me.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that none of these things have stopped your guests from listening before, right?
No.
So at the end of the day, how much does it really matter?
I know, but it is nice to improve it. I have hummed and hawed about using Zencastr. Again, sometimes Wi-Fi is not a girl's best friend. And so that to me is almost like a security feature. So I have totally been on the fence. So maybe I'll play with these extra little tips that you've given me and then kind of see where I land.
Yeah. Well, right now, I believe too, Zencastr is actually free if you don't record the video. So that's if you don't need the video element, or if you want to record the video element separately or something, match them together, which seems like a lot of work. But if that's not important to you, then it's free. And you do only get the MP3 version versus a WAV file, which is a little bit higher quality. So, but at the end of the day, you know, if you don't want to use Zoom, you could use Zencastr for the same price or for free if you don't need to capture that video at the same time.
Well, that's a good tip. I like free and I like shoestring budgets. So that is super helpful. Now, I know you teach podcasters and people that want to get into podcasting, you know, all of these technical things to overcome, but also how to launch and promote and do all that good stuff with podcasting. And of course, the name is cute as a button, Pineapple Podcast Academy. And you even have like live coaching with it, which is huge because people have tons of questions. So can you share a little bit more about that? Because I'm sure I just did not do it justice.
Oh, well, thank you for allowing me the opportunity. It's really my biggest passion right now. I love helping aspiring podcasters because my my life completely changed when I started my podcast. I started my
Love it.
podcast from scratch, 7 years ago. We were completely struggling. We were, 2 times below the poverty line, living on food stamps, hitting up food banks. Like, we were really a struggling family.
Geez.
And I, needed to find a solution, and people kind of laugh when they're like, "Oh, so your solution was to start a podcast?" Sure. That'll bring in the money. Because that's kind of the stigma right now with podcasters is, oh, there's no money in podcasting, but I'm kind of here to prove people wrong. I
Yes,
started my
love
podcast.
that.
It didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It was a marathon, not a sprint, but
Yes.
a year in, I started getting sponsors, and now, 7 years later, I run a 6-figure business now because of my podcast. So
Yay.
it's been just the biggest blessing for
Yeah.
me. And I was able to do that even though I had no experience, no college degree. I, picked a completely weird niche. My podcast is all about essential oils. Like, that there's only a small amount of people in the world that really care about a podcast all about essential
But there's
oils.
golden niches.
But there's
Niching
gold
down
in
is
niches,
key.
right? That's the point. And that's one part of Pineapple Podcast Academy that I really narrow in on is that first week. I don't even teach you technical stuff for a whole week because I really force you to narrow in on what exactly is your podcast going to be about. And I do encourage people, it's not mandatory, but I do encourage people who are starting from the beginning to really think about niching down. Go a little smaller, go a little weirder, let your freak flag fly a little bit, because that's really the way to get your foot in the door. And it's a beautiful thing about podcasting is to be able to start something that's so unique, that's so almost weird or niche that it does attract people into your life, and you get to be this influencer in this little weird industry, right? And build something beautiful out of it. So that's what we do is really literally I hold people's hands from, pre-concept all the way through to launch, growing, systemizing. I only work on my podcast about 4 hours a week now, and it's just completely streamlined. And so I share my whole map for that, my whole system.
Good for you.
And, but the live coaching that you mentioned too is absolutely my favorite part too, because that's where people really get to come on and be like, hey, I've got this idea, or, hey, here's my cover art first draft, and get feedback, not just from me, but from their peers. And I find that really, really invaluable for people.
Yeah. And fun for you to actually connect with your students and see their progress and see their excitement and their passion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. And how can people find it?
Just pineapplepodcasting.com. That's where you can go and learn more about the course.
Awesome. Thank you for all your great tips today. I've mentally taken a lot of notes and, of course we'll, share it with our audience and, and hopefully get more people to start podcasting. Yeah.
The world needs more great podcasts.
They do.
Sure.
Yes.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Lyndsay.
Thanks,
I really
Samantha.
appreciate you having me.